Yes, hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here tonight to hear what what Ms. Stein and Mr. McEachran have to say regarding CASA. They do such a wonderful job and a very important organization here with Baltimore County. So I'm very happy to see that there's a good crowd that has turned out today to hear what they have to say on this part one series. I am also part of the Bar Association. I am not an attorney. So I highly suggest that you if you have a chance to become involved with the Baltimore County Bar Association, if you're in any way associated with the legal profession. I am a mediator myself, and I have been involved with law for many years. And so definitely to look into the Bar Association. We have a great crowd, very good networking ability too, because we have some of the best attorneys in Maryland. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to give a brief bio of our three speakers. First is Jennifer Stein. Jennifer is the Executive Director of Court Appointed Special Advocate, also known as CASA, program in Baltimore County. And she's been working in child welfare for almost 20 years. She started as a foster care worker in Austin, Texas, and then moved into the nonprofit sphere at the Travis County CASA program. In 2009, she joined CASA of Baltimore County, first as an advocate supervisor, training and supporting CASA volunteers in their advocacy for children in foster care, then as a program director, and she became executive director in 2015. Jennifer believes that the work of the child welfare system is not only to protect individual children and support families, but also serves to combat poverty, homelessness, crime, and more, as foster care is the intersection of all social, health, and economic issues. In addition, we have Susan Empfinger. She is the Director of Outreach and Engagement for CASA of Baltimore County. Susan was 15 years old and living in Michigan when she requested to be placed into foster care as the only viable alternative to living in a home dominated by alcoholism, prescription opioid abuse, and its collateral effects. With the help of an empathetic social worker and an understanding judge who placed her in the care of an exceptional foster family, Susan was able to remain in the same foster placement for the next 2 years and then went off to college. Susan freely admits that she never thought much about foster care as a unique experience until sometime after college. When talking to a friend, she discovered that he too had been in foster care. They started to compare notes, and Susan found herself wondering how many of us are out there and how can former foster youth help business and community leaders to understand the positive impact of investing in foster youth. That conversation led Susan to co-found one of the country's first endowed scholarships for former foster youth at Michigan State University, as well as to begin to promote foster youth educational and professional success through her professional and personal lives. After a 10-year+ career in government, as well as in alumni relations and development for higher ed, in her current role, Susan develops partnerships, both human and financial, for CASA of Baltimore County. In her position with CASA, Susan is a professional French-English interpreter and translator. Wow, that's interesting. Susan has a BA in French from Michigan State University and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University. And last but certainly not least, Dan, I'm going to really do a number on your last name, Dan. I apologize. Is it McEachran? Hopefully I'm not.
Think Akron, Ohio.
McEachran. Closer? Closer.
Yes,
has worked for CASA of Baltimore County for the past 11 years, first as an advocate supervisor, and since 2014 as program director. Prior to that, he taught 7th grade social studies and math at Grandview Middle School in Hickory, North Carolina. He also served as the executive director of Cooperative Christian Ministries, a crisis assistance and healthcare ministry in Hickory. He has also practiced as an attorney for Camden Regional Legal Services in New Jersey, managed an in-home detention program for LKEC Services in Philadelphia. He has a BA from William and Mary in Government, an MSW, and a JD through a joint program with the University of Richmond and Virginia Commonwealth University. He's been married for 39 years to his wife, Deborah, who's a Presbyterian minister who currently serves the Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church in Baltimore. They have 3 sons, Chris, Andrew, and Tim, who are all married, and 4 grandchildren. You don't look old enough to have grandchildren. Pierce, Abigail, Paxton, and Marin. He has enjoyed his work at CASA, feeling that it allowed him to use all of his different interests, including teaching, social work, and law. He also has enjoyed getting to know the wide variety of volunteers that form the backbone of CASA. So with that, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you. So as Donna said, I am Jennifer Stein. I'm the Executive Director for CASA of Baltimore County. I am going to go ahead and share my screen because we have some visual things for you to look at, so you're not just staring at us talking. That's going to mean that I can't see you because apparently I can't see you when I share this way. So just shout out if you need something or have questions or if there are any issues. So I'm going to go ahead and whoops, wait, don't look yet. That's the end. Sorry, should have done it the other way. All right, so here we are. So we are CASA of Baltimore County. We've just been introduced. I'm the Executive Director. You'll hear from Dan and me a little bit back and forth for this first part. And then Susan's going to speak toward the end. We're also going to show you a couple of videos to help sort of explain things in ways that we can't just by talking. So I'm going to just start with what is CASA. As you heard, CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. We are part of a national network of CASA programs. There is a National CASA Association in Seattle. And CASA was started in Seattle in 1977. There was a judge who was, he was tasked with making really hard decisions that were going to impact the lives of children. And he felt like he was hearing from all the people involved, but all those people, the social workers, the attorneys, everybody had really high caseloads. And so he felt like he wanted more detailed, more individualized information on each child and each family and their situations. So he sort of deputized someone from the community and said, I want you to go out. I want you to get to know this child and this family. If I could step down off the bench and get to know every single person that comes in front of me, what would I want to know? What would I want to know about how they're doing, about what they want for themselves and for their family? And what would I want to do for them in strictly a best interest perspective? So that's how CASA got started in 1977, and that's still the model and the philosophy that we use. We in Baltimore County, our program was started in 2000, so we've been around for about 22 years. Since we started, we have grown significantly. So in Baltimore County, there are approximately 650 children each year that are in the Baltimore County foster care system I don't know if you know the child welfare side of legal things, but there is a designation of CINA, which is Child in Need of Assistance. I apologize if I'm telling you things you already know. But each year in Baltimore County, there are about 650 children that are designated as CINA. And those are children that have been determined by DSS and by the courts. DSS is the Department of Social Services, to have been abused or neglected by their caregivers, and they are under the DSS and court jurisdiction to keep them safe while whatever brought them into foster care is being addressed, and then hopefully to be able to either send them home if their home becomes safe, or to be able to find another permanent option for them, whether that's being adopted, ideally by a relative if they can't go home, or to find another caring family that can keep them safe and long-term so that kids aren't bouncing around either within the foster care system or, sort of finding places to be outside of the foster care system. So that's what we do. We're going to go into some more detail about what that looks like on an individual basis. But that's our goal, is to serve all 650 children. Right now, we're able to serve about a third of that. We work with about 200 kids each year. And that's really a function of our capacity, the size of our organization. And all those kids they range from age 0 all the way to age 21. In Maryland, kids can stay in foster care until 21. And typically we encourage them to do that. When they turn 18, they have the option to leave care because they're legally adults and can make that decision. But typically, not always, but typically, youth find out that it's really hard to be on their own at 18. And so we try to encourage them to stay as long as they can to have the supports in place as long as possible. So the two main things that we do are mentoring and advocacy. And we're going to talk about this in detail in a minute, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But we are unique in the sense that our program and our role is actually built into Maryland statute. I don't have it offhand. I can find it for you if you'd like to see it in the statute. But what that means is that while we do mentor and particularly when we're working with older youth, that relationship absolutely develops. But it also means that we have a true legal obligation to be making sure that we are figuring out how this child and family are doing and make recommendations for what's in the best interest of this child as part of the court process and as part of what we are asked to do through statute. So that makes us a very unique program. And while there are programs all across the country and all across Maryland, each program is run individually and is typically tied to its local jurisdiction. So again, we're the Baltimore County program, so all of our children are Baltimore County children and families and are under the Baltimore County Circuit Court.
Okay, this is me.
Yes, this is you.
Okay, all right. Good evening. The role of the CASA volunteer, that really, for me, the best way to kind of explain it, when I first came to Maryland 11 years ago, I had never heard of CASA, and so I was thinking about it tonight, and the idea of the friend of the court, we are not necessarily a party to the case, but I think one of the reasons that judges appreciate us is they do really view us as their assistant or helper in terms of providing them with information to help them better decide these cases that cause them so much difficulty. And so I really do think that if you ask the judges, and we are their friend of the court in terms of helping them to deal with these cases. And we're supposed to be, I think part of the reason that they appreciate us is that we're coming at it in an unbiased way. We're not coming from any particular point of view. And what we are to do is we get to know the youth by seeing them at least once a month, but we also get to know all the other pieces of the youth's life. We get to know their foster parents if they're in a foster home or in a group home. We get to know the staff there. We get to know their biological parents if they're involved. But we also have the ability to have communication with the schools, with medical and mental health providers. And what we are to do then, I think, is to come up with a really well-rounded picture of what that youth's life is like. And then I think we make what I call community common sense recommendations to the court about what we see is in their best interests. And one of I mean, we really are court appointed advocates. We have a court order that allows us to really do many things, to be able to go to schools, to see school records, to see any records really that relate to the child, to attend meetings that have to do with the child, a wide variety of things that give the CASA volunteer the ability to get the information that they need to be able to make their best recommendations to the court. And why don't we go to the next one?
Sorry, I'm trying. It's not listening to me.
That's okay.
Give me a second. There we go.
Oh. And when it says we participate in the court process, the volunteers actually write reports with our assistants, with the supervisor's assistants, and come to court as well. And you know, it's interesting. The judges or the magistrates primarily who hear the cases keep the cases, and so they get to know not only the kids, but they get to know the CASA volunteers as well. I have one volunteer whose name is Bud, who is probably on his fourth youth in terms of working with CASA. But on his last case, he was in front of the judge, and the magistrate listened to all the other people say what they wanted to say, and then he looks at Bud. He says, "Now, Bud, what do you think?" And I was just really kind of blown away by that, because it shows that he really wanted to, he respected Bud from having had him in front of him before. And he really wanted to know what Bud thought, because what we hear from the judges is that the thing that CASAs do for them the most is they help them to just get a picture of what the child's life is like, and because they know them best for having spent the most time with them. And you know, one other, the people who make up our volunteer pool is a wide variety of people. I have one volunteer who's in his 70s, who was the head auditor for the University of Georgia, and who is just so into video games that you wouldn't believe it, but it helps him to relate to the kids. And it's just a wide variety of different volunteers. And I think that for me, that's really one of the best parts of the job, is to be able to get to know all these people who care so much for the kids and who work with them in the way that they do. Okay, you can go on. We, in addition to meeting with the kid, we also have a lot of contact with the DSS social worker, with children's attorneys, and as well as with parents' attorneys. And again, I think that the most important thing we can do for the court is to provide information to them about the kids. Our volunteers, like I said, are of many different types, and sometimes they worry when we're doing our training with them that they're not social workers, or they're not attorneys, or they may not be able to have expertise in certain areas. And I tell them that's not what we want. We really want them just to be themselves. And because the two most important things that a CASA volunteer can be are to be consistent and committed to the kids, because those are things that most of the kids we work with don't have and have not experienced, is someone who is consistently there for them no matter what's going on, and who are committed to their welfare. And so by doing that, by showing up every time, we come to eventually get the confidence of the kids, and then that helps us to present the kind of fact-based, independent information to the court that they need from us. Okay. And again, a CASA volunteer is not a social worker or an attorney. That we are not professional. We're not. I mean, when we have volunteers who are attorneys, who are social workers, we don't let them use their little letters when they sign their names, because that's not the role that they're taking. Their role is to be a volunteer who's observing, and not necessarily to be a professional in that particular instance. And big brother and big sister, I was talking with someone who just went through our training today, and she described CASA as you may start with the base is kind of like big brother, big sister, but it's much more than that, because what we're doing is we're making recommendations to the court about what is in the child's best interest, and that's a really pretty big responsibility.
All right, thank you, Dan. So we are going to watch a little video. If there's any trouble with sound, let me know, but here we go.
Growing up is tough for a kid. They have school and homework, practices and games, there are doctor's appointments and detention halls. The making friends and the keeping friends, discovering who they are and who they aren't. There's so much to learn. There's this whole world out there, right here. These times are transforming in someone's story, and they can really be quite chaotic. That chaos of being a child only increases when abuse and neglect fill their home. The normal winds of chaos are now a storm, and sometimes, when the storm is so great, a child must be removed from their home. And this is a really tough day. It's complicated and it's painful. When a child is removed from their home because of abuse or neglect, they leave their normal and they enter foster care. The court sends them to a new place, a new home, often to a new school with new people, new everything. And all of these new things aim at a better life for the child. They aim to help in the healing process for the family. But it's still tough. They still have the school activities, the doctor's appointments, and the lessons to learn. But now court dates, visits with parents, and check-ins with social workers quickly bombard the calendar. And there's the pain of separation from what they know and where they feel comfortable. There are hundreds of children in our city who experience chaotic days like this, weeks like this, years like this. And these days, weeks, and years are difficult. They're exhausting and isolating. They're really tough. But there are ways to help. Ways to bear the burdens the child is carrying. Ways to make the days less tough. These children need to feel more supported. They need someone constant who is on their team. Someone who is fighting for their best amidst all the shuffle. And a CASA volunteer provides this help. A court-appointed special advocate helps bear these burdens. They are the constant amidst the chaos. In the middle of all the shuffle and uncertainty, they know the child. There are still tough days, but now there's someone standing up for the child, day in, day out. Someone who knows both the biological and foster parents. Someone who meets with the teachers, doctors, and social workers to ensure the child's needs are being met. Someone who speaks for the child's best interest in court. Someone who the judge counts on for insight. Someone who cares about the child and just lets them be a kid. Someone who is there for the tough days, the great days, and the in-between days. This someone is so important. This someone is a CASA volunteer. And there are hundreds of children in our city waiting for a CASA volunteer. They're waiting for someone to speak up for them. They're waiting for someone to help weather the storm. Each child in foster care needs this support, this someone to count on. Be this someone for a child in foster care. Be their advocate. Be a powerful voice for their best interest. Be a CASA volunteer. Growing up is tough.
Sorry. All right. So obviously, we're not here to ask you to be a CASA volunteer, although we wouldn't turn you away if you wanted to. But that gives a sense of some of the detail that our volunteers go into, and the all the different people that they're talking with. And all of that goes to why CASA is an important piece of the child welfare system and the court process. Judges, the National CASA does studies and surveys of judges and outcomes for kids. And judges report consistently that they feel that they have better information when they're making these really hard decisions for kids and families when there's a CASA on the case. I will say that you heard of my bio. I was a foster care worker. The workers in Baltimore County overall are really, really good, and they try very, very hard. It is a thankless job, and people truly are overworked and underpaid in that role. And I talk all the time. I mean, we do trainings for social workers as well, DSS workers. And what I say is it benefits you to have a CASA on a case because we have the luxury of time. Our volunteers tend to be one-to-one, one volunteer to one child. Sometimes there's one volunteer and one sibling group. But the idea is that our volunteers have the time to be able to really get to know each individual child, each individual family, and all the people that sort of are their village around them, to be able to figure out what's going on for them and what do they need, what do they want, and what supports can we provide, and ultimately what's best for that particular child. And so the courts consistently say that they are able to make better and more informed decisions because they have all that information coming in from the volunteer that's really specific to that child. Similarly, there are better outcomes for children and families. We'll see a little bit more of that in a minute. And then positive impacts on the community as a whole and cost savings to the community and to government. We'll hear a little bit about that in just a second too, but we truly believe that we are part of a huge ripple effect. And that, again, we're working with children and families that are the intersection of almost every issue you could possibly think of. And so if we can work with these children and families to become healthier now, it will only help the broader community later. So how effective is CASA? This is what I was alluding to. So there are studies out there, and they show that children who have a CASA volunteer have fewer placement changes. There is a national statistic that children in foster care change placements every 6 months. So if you can kind of wrap your head around that for a second, you know, I think about my children. They had to move from one family to another every 6 months. That's hugely traumatizing. It's very, very difficult. It often means that they're also changing schools and teachers and doctors and friends and everyone else around them, which also impacts educational outcomes, because there are other studies that show that every time a child changes a school, they lose about 6 months of educational gain. So children in foster care, for lots of reasons, but partly because of their frequent moves, are also often very, very behind in school. So fewer placement changes is a really big deal. Children also tend to spend less time in out-of-home placements, so less time in foster homes or group homes and more time in their family homes. They receive more services, both children and families. They're less likely to re-enter foster care. So again, the goal is to get kids out of foster care and into a permanent home. And what we don't want is for kids to bounce in and out of foster care. And so kids with CASA volunteers tend to, once they go home, they stay there. Again, they have better outcomes around education. And this includes both academic outcomes, behavioral outcomes, truancy, things like that. Long-term well-being and permanency all are improved with a CASA volunteer. And then one of the ones that I just loved was, there are several reports out there that show that kids with a CASA have significantly higher levels of hope. And Susan's going to talk a little bit later about the importance of having that one person with you. But CASAs really provide that. I mean, that's not our primary goal. Our primary goal is that best interest advocacy to the courts. But I would almost argue that this is the best thing that we do, because we hear from our older kids and our former kids that what they remember and what they took away from their experience with their CASA is just that someone was there to care about them. These are our CASA of Baltimore County outcomes for fiscal year 19. I left it a few years back because COVID's a mess. So I decided to skip over the COVID years for now. But what I wanted to show here is that one of the things that we try really hard to do is to engage the families. And our first attempt is always to send children home if possible. Mom's mom, dad's dad, grandma's grandma. You know, if a kid can go back home, which I can count on one hand the number of kids that did not want to go home. If there's a way for them to go home safely and have that be a permanent solution, that's really what we want. And so I just wanted to show here that our numbers in 2019 were that we had 44% of our kids returning home to the people they were removed from. We also had 9% adopted, and 11 of them were placed with a relative. Typically that would be for like custody going to the relative as opposed to a full adoption, but the custody was given to the relative. So again, keeping families together is a really important thing. And then you'll also see that we had 18% of youth leave foster care with independence, where they were fairly stable and, you know, in an apartment, working or in school, something like that. We have a few percentages of people that left the court case closed and they were not in a permanent situation. Typically, those are kids who have aged out of care and are not fully stable, or at least not stable enough that we feel like we can sort of count them as permanent. So I'm pretty pleased with those numbers. I think they're pretty good. All right, back to you, Dan. Are you still good on time?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Good. And the advocate supervisors are, what our jobs are is first, we interview the potential volunteers as they come in to see if they, to tell them about CASA actually, and to see if we think that they'll be able to do a good job. The whole process actually of becoming a CASA involves first being going through an interview and then doing background checks. But there's also a training. This is 33 hours, and the supervisors do that training. Each of us take at least one of the classes, one of the reasons we do that is because we want to get to know the volunteers, because the last thing we're doing, actually, we're doing one of these tomorrow, is we have a meeting where we try to match the volunteers with the referrals that we've gotten. And we think it's important that we know the volunteers so that we can do better matches. And so the whole process of helping people to become volunteers is an evaluation process, because we want to make sure as much as possible that the matches work for the kids, because the worst thing that can happen is to assign a child a volunteer who then leaves or isn't able to do the job, because that's kind of another mark, I guess. And so we do the best we can to really try to make sure that we're doing a good job training and doing a good job screening, and then doing the best we can matching. It covers a variety of different topics. We talk about the court, we talk about ACEs, we talk about we talk about report writing, but a lot of what we talk about is just being able to make decisions about how you evaluate how you look at families. We spend, I know there's one of the lessons where we spend a lot of time just talking about looking for positives in families, because that's a really important thing. And I think one of the things we really have to encourage the volunteers to do is to try to find positive things in the families, because it's things to build on, because like Jennifer said, most of the kids want to go back home if their parents can resolve whatever the issues were. So the training is a really important thing. We have ongoing training also. We try to offer something at least every month that the volunteers can go to. 12 hours are annually required. Some of the best training that we actually do is when we have case discussions and have the volunteers come in and just talk with themselves about what is going on with their cases, because I think they get the best ideas of how to solve things from themselves, from other people having encountered similar things. And one of the two other pieces of the training is we have one panel of just volunteers who speak to the volunteers as they're going through training, so that they can kind of have somebody who's actually doing it talking to them as opposed to the supervisors. And we also, the last session we have is I call it the magistrates kind of panel, because we have one of the three main magistrates that do the synod cases. I try to kind of rotate them through so they don't have to do it all the time, but I think they really do enjoy coming to the trainings. And we also have a child's attorney and a parent's attorney and someone from the Department of Social Services. And I think that gives the volunteers a really good picture and lets them ask some really good questions of that panel to try to be better prepared for when they actually do start to become volunteers. And our supervisors all are master's level professionals. We try to speak with all of our volunteers at least once a month. Honestly, one of the things that we do that I think we do the most is we listen, because working with some of these difficult situations, there can be one step forward and two steps back, or two steps forward and one step back. And oftentimes our volunteers just need somebody to talk to and to tell them, it's going to be okay, and keep working at it. But we also, what our supervisors also do is we find out about resources that can be available for youth. We try to help communicate with the Department of Social Services and other agencies when that's necessary. But the big thing we are supports for the work being done by the volunteers.
Okay, thank you.
And I probably should go.
That's fine. Dan has to be somewhere else, so we're going to let him go. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so we're going to watch one additional video of sort of the impact that CASA can have, and then you're going to hear from Susan.
My name is Alonzo Portlock, and I'm 3 years old, and I'm sitting on the front steps. My brother and I were waiting for my mother to come out and take us to the beach. So our mother's inside the house doing what she normally does. You know, she's probably getting high, but we're waiting for her on the steps. And all of a sudden, this woman comes out of the house and just stabs me in the back 4 times. After that, I don't remember anything. You know, I just blacked out. I'm 8 years old. My mother's still using the drugs and everything. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she decides, I don't want to be a mother anymore. Because now it's like, now what? Now what do we do? 30 minutes later, I'm in the system. I'm institutionalized now. That was real tough for me.
My name is Kaya, and I'm 26. And I like being a veterinarian because I love working with animals, getting their shots and making sure they're okay and they're not sick, and giving them back to their owners. I'm 35 and I have 2 kids. We like to go skiing, race each other downhill, and we're happy, and then we do it again.
Hi, my name is Pamela Butler, and I am 6 years old. We've been traveling in the car for quite some time now, and it's cold. And tonight we'll be sleeping in the back of a U-Haul, and we don't have any blankets. And I don't know when we'll eat. Now I'm 7 years old. My mom just woke me up. She's yelling and running around and grabbing all of our stuff and grabbing my sister and myself. All my mom kept saying was, the cops are coming, the cops are coming. We ran outside, and she told me to hide under one of the cars. So I crawled underneath one of the cars in the parking lot, and I heard the cops come and the sirens and yelling, and they're grabbing my mom and arresting her and my stepfather. And they've got my sister, and everyone's yelling, and then the cop like crawls under and grabs me out and puts me in the back of a police car, and I watched as my mom faded away.
Being a police officer is kind of a good job to the world because you can save lives. I'm 25 years old, my name is Scott Williams, and I'm a police officer. My name is Jonathan Williams. I am 38 years old, and I like to preach. I like talking people out of violence or bullying, and that's why I like being a preacher. The happiest moment in my life is right now.
I'm glad I met my CASA because I don't have to live that life. I don't. A lot of people live that life because they have to, but I don't have to because I have an option. I have a CASA now. Because it was someone that took interest in me that I didn't have before, because when you're in these foster homes, you get lost. So I didn't feel alone. I felt like there was somebody there. There was someone there that wasn't there before. To me, my CASA was an all-star, you can say. He enlightened us. He turned the light on.
Home is where you come from. Where you come from is where you don't want to leave. It feels kind of wonderful because I got my guardian ad litem next to my side and my family next to my side. It feels kind of wonderful. It makes me feel like I have people who care for me. And now I'm back home, I'm just like, I'm happy.
To me, my CASA means a trusted friend, an advocate, a voice. Because when you're young, no one listens to you. They really don't, especially in the foster care system. So for that, she's been everything, like the light at the end of the tunnel. But she's the highlight of my life. She was my friend. I didn't really have anybody.
My nickname is Laffy Taffy because when I hear something funny, I laugh a lot. What I like about my new family is I have lots of brothers and sisters to play with, spending time with them. So it makes me feel really good to have brothers and sisters who can look out for me. If I could tell my new mom one thing, I'd probably tell her that I love her and she's a great mom.
To give a child a CASA is to give them a voice, and to give them a voice is to give them hope, and to give them the hope is to give them the world. And I believe that with all my heart. I don't know what I'd do without my CASA. I don't want to imagine.
All right, Susan, you're up.
I'm going to take myself off mute. There you go. First of all, I want to thank everybody again for coming and learning about CASA. It's an organization that's come to me a lot because, you know, it's really unbelievably isolating. I'm going to get all choked up. It's unbelievably isolating to have been in foster care. And I guess what I can say about people who make the difference are the people who stay, and CASA volunteers stay. And this particular organization has volunteers that have been around for 10 years, 20 years. When was the one that just retired? 17 years? More?
I think it was 18.
Yeah. So while we're talking to you guys about volunteer stuff, we're also talking to you about a system that really needs your help in any way that you can dive in and help. So CASA really is, a CASA volunteer is somebody who is a caring adult who comes into a child's life at the most vulnerable moment in a system where I can remember going to court. I can remember standing there. I can remember not knowing if I was ever going to see my family again or ever see anybody again. I'm sorry, you guys, this hasn't happened in a while. And it was pretty amazing to feel like I would never be able to go home again. And why wouldn't I be able to go home? Well, home was dysfunctional. As it happened in my life, I had a wonderful social worker. I had wonderful foster parents, but for every kid who has somebody like that, I'm the exception. I asked to go into foster care. There are hundreds, thousands of kids who do not have that advocate for them in the foster care system. So in your capacity as students of the law of how things work, I would really invite you to look at this very ignored system and keep your eye on it. When you can get a kid in foster care to successfully, and success is a very tenuous sometimes thing, but it's also very what does success mean? People always ask me that. And I would say it's getting to a place in your life where you're stable, you're meeting your bills, you're paying your rent, you're able to have relationships, these things we call stability, right? And you're not repeating the same things over and over again, which happens with trauma, right? You have a tendency to repeat it. So the community impact for interrupting that cycle is really key in helping a child not repeat the cycle. 70% of kids who, I don't know if I can even cite the figure right now, but kids who've been in foster care are much more likely to have kids who go into foster care. They're much less likely to be able to complete college. There was a study that a friend of mine did that showed that kids who go into college are much less, they graduate at much slower rates than any other population, independent of race, independent of class, socioeconomic condition. They go into it with every intention of graduating, but they graduate at a slower rate and they don't complete it because it's tough for them. They're making up for a lot of lost time in terms of education. They're making it up for lost time in terms of a lot of stuff that's happened to them. And it's very hard to concentrate, I would say, once you've been in foster care, because your life has been interrupted so much. The same channel in your brain that you use to learn new things is the same channel in your brain that you use to bring new things in. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that's true because when you're trying to learn something new, you're opening up your mind, and that opens the floodgates many times to past trauma. So I would say the most important thing that you can do is try to go into that cycle, get into foster care and study that system and try to make an impact in improving the outcomes for kids. I would say CASA volunteers are often the only caring adult for kids in foster care because they tend to be hidden. If you're moving every 6 months, you're losing your teachers, you're losing your doctors, you're losing everybody who can keep an eye on you consistently. CASA volunteers are really critical in being able to keep their eyes on the kids. So what's the benefit of that relationship? The benefit is what we call social capital for kids. I would say kids get to have an eye on a person who is stable in their lives, get an idea of the fact that there is an outside world that's beyond what they're currently living, which is often pretty close to hell, to be honest. You don't necessarily feel connected to the people you live with. You can't go back home. So you need that one bridge to the future that a CASA volunteer often represents. And that gives hope, going back to what Jennifer was saying, that one relationship, that one bridge to the future is often the CASA volunteer, and that represents hope. And I would say that you can't be a CASA volunteer without giving. You can't be a CASA volunteer without developing a relationship with the kid, which in turn helps to give that kid hope. It just does. It's a natural offshoot. So whether it's the primary goal or the secondary goal, it inevitably happens, and the kids appreciate it, and they come out the other side much better for it. The personal impact, I didn't have a CASA, but what I did have was people in my life who cared, who did not disappear. I can tell you, I've talked to a 21-year-old young woman on the porch of her shelter that she'd stayed in. Shelter was a group home, I guess, technically, but you wouldn't have known that based on the way that the place looked. She was kicked out on her 21st birthday because that's when foster care ends, and that's when all of the supports end. And where was she a month later? Where was she 2 months later? She was in a shelter. She was in a shelter, and she was pregnant. So you see what I'm talking about when I say cycles, and I know many of you do, because we're all from, we've all seen the world and we all know what it's like. But I would submit to you that if you went to your local officials and asked them how many kids are in foster care and how do they think that affects the kids' lives, they wouldn't be able to tell you, because these kids are hidden. They don't get asked nearly enough how they feel. And the child care workers are horrifically underpaid, competing with the wages of Chick-fil-A. And no, I'm not kidding. They have, what's the caseload in Baltimore County right now, do you think, Jen?
Right now, I don't even know. They are about 40% understaffed right now. So typically they're in Baltimore County, it's 20 cases or so per worker. The recommended average for a worker is 12. Right now it's well above 20, and people who are not supposed to carry cases like supervisors and other people are having to carry cases right now. So
I would just say to you that you cannot get involved enough in caring about foster care. I would say that the way to get involved in the foster care system is often through CASA, because again, they're court authorized to investigate and to look at and shed light on every single aspect of a child's life. And if you've been moved every 6 months, and if you consistently develop no hope whatsoever, and you suddenly have hope, it's going to be through a CASA volunteer. Typically, it's going to be through one person that you can count on. Come hell or high water, you can count on that person. Time and time again, I hear from kids who've had a CASA, that CASA has come to rescue them, has come to search for them when they're in the shelter, has come to, investigate where they are at 2 o'clock in the morning when they get that call. Hey, I'm in DC. Everybody left me. They took my wallet. I don't know what to do. Kids make crazy decisions, jump in a car, go off somewhere. And it's the CASA volunteer who will step up. There's a child who's been through Baltimore County CASA who credits her CASA volunteer with getting her out of a lockdown facility. Why was she in a lockdown facility? Literally a place where the windows had bars on them. Why was she there? Why was she there for so long? Sure, she had problems. But on the other hand, she was there too long. And she credits her CASA volunteer with coming in and advocating and getting her out. Because due to no one's, I'm sure her social workers her child care worker had a good reason to quit, but her child care workers kept getting reassigned or kept quitting. So she kept getting lost in the cracks, but it was her CASA volunteer who got her out. And if I'm telling you all these things and you start to feel like, oh, it can't really be that bad, I'm telling you it's that bad. So I'm sorry to bring you all this bad news, but the good news is there's so much that you can do in so many different ways. And I know that you'll address these things later as time goes on. that you cannot lose by learning about foster care. It's just the most pressing need, I would say, vested interest, but I would say of our community. And again, with regard to CASA, Jen alluded to, the size of our organization, and the size of our organization is directly linked to funding. And there's a formula that CASA involves. For every staff person, they can manage so many children. And why is that? Well, you don't want to get into the same situation that the kids are in when they go in. Child workers have too many kids, and we limit the number of kids that a CASA volunteer can manage at any one time. So we're very careful about that. The good news is we are so careful. The other good news is we can always use more funding. So if you ever get asked for gifts to CASA, you'll know that it's going to a good organization. 47%, Jen, you can go back, I'm sorry. 47% of our funds come from government grants, and that's all different kinds of grants. That's federal, state, and local. We're always interested in developing that category, and we always do, but that's where we are right now. My dog is digging into paper on the ground right now. If you hear a crackle. Zachary, stop. And but we also have foundations and other grants. I'm going to come back to that in a minute because I really want to point out where individual gifts are so important. We have a special event that's a wonderful event that's fully 20% of our budget every year. And we have contributions from individuals like you, like your family, like anyone that you know. What I want to say about that is you'll note that the foundations and the other grants, which might be companies, for example, they are not as big as the individual contributions. It's not as big as the amount of money that comes from contributions from individuals. So I would say that your strength as an individual to any organization that you feel like giving to, and particularly to CASA, is that it multiplies with other gifts. So even the smallest gift matters, and we always look for larger gifts too. Individuals are incredibly powerful, even with a $5 gift in an organization like ours. So I will just remind you of that. And this is not a fundraising campaign that we're doing here. They did not invite us in to ask you money, but I'm also a fundraiser. So I always talk about money, and I love money because it allows us to do more. And by the way, it's not going into our pockets. That I can guarantee you. But we really appreciate each and every gift, and that's why. The more money we have, the more kids we can serve, and that's what we're actively seeking at any given point. Is there a next slide, Jen? I was trying to remember. The other ways that you can become involved with CASA is you can become a CASA volunteer advocate. A lot of people, when they're talking about foster care, they think, oh, I want to be a foster parent. Think very carefully about that. You can even become a CASA volunteer as a test run for what you feel like, and how you want to work with a foster youth. I feel like that's a great way to become familiar. It's also, however, hard work. So don't think it's not. It's come to a training and come to an informational session. We'll be happy to inform you about that. I've already talked about fundraising. I love fundraising. I think it's the best thing in the world. But I also want to say, if you have a friend or a family member who you thought, oh, they're retired now, they're looking for a meaningful role in the community, man, have we got a great role for that person. So feel free to refer them to Jen or to me or to anyone in the CASA office, and we'll start informing and talking with that person. You can certainly have a picnic, have a dinner for CASA. We will come anywhere and talk about foster care, and I promise not to cry every time. But we also do office lunches and learns. So if you are working in a law firm later on, or any group of people really, and you want to say, hey, come and talk about foster care. And by the way, Susan, don't cry. I'll be happy to come with Jennifer, and we can do that then. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate it. And I should mention, we've got an evening with CASA coming up. If you happen to have some money to spend on a ticket and you want a great night out, we're the people to talk to. And there's the website right there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Susan. That was wonderful. I always appreciate your insights, and I mean, you care a lot, so don't apologize. It's wonderful.
Well, yeah.
So thank you. I am aware of the time, but if there are any questions that anyone has, we are happy to stay 2 minutes, or as long as you want us to stay, we'll be here. I think you guys have another part of class to get to, but does anybody have any questions for us? Yeah, Dawn.
How do you determine who gets a CASA volunteer, since not every foster kid gets one?
Yep, that's a great question. So basically there's two parts to that. One is that we get referrals from 3 different sources. The courts themselves refer, the DSS social workers refer, and the children's attorneys. So on their end, they do a little bit of a triage because they know we don't have enough volunteers for everybody. So they'll refer us children that they think need the most help. And then on our end, we base it mostly on the matches that we have to make. So who are the volunteers that are available to take cases? We do have some other things that kind of help us prioritize. So for example, if the court is the referral source, sometimes we'll prioritize that since that's who we are here for, basically. Or I mean, other things, needs of the child. There are certain ways that we sort of prioritize, but it sort of ends up that we often have a wait list that is appropriate for the number of volunteers that we have because people don't give us referrals for every single child. Teresa, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. One day I was coming from the Kaysville campus, and I got lost and I passed by.
Is that me, Anna Marie? I can't.
Miss Young, my apologies.
Maryland.
Miss Young, my apologies. We cannot hear you.
I think there's an issue with Teresa's bandwidth. She's one of my students.
If she wants to put her question in the chat, if someone wants to chat to her, I'm happy to respond in the chat.
I will. I'll let her know.
Okay. I think it's catching up. She muted herself, but it's still going.
I will let my students know if you're in here. It is unfortunately time we do need to log out and get back into Teams. So I do appreciate Jennifer and Susan and communication. If you do have additional questions, you can send them to me and I will.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to answer any questions people have.
Yes.
Thanks so much for this opportunity. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Ms. Mandel said, any of her students, please get on back to class. And I'm sorry for the lag that we're still hearing. That's never happened before, so that's interesting. So in the meantime, if there is someone here that wants to take a couple of minutes to ask questions for Susan and Jennifer, I'll stay on the line a couple more minutes. If anyone has any more questions for them. Thank you, Susan and Jennifer. Susan, this has been wonderful to hear your story and meet you this evening. I've met Jennifer before, you know, and it's okay to cry because I was sitting here trying not to cry as I'm watching these videos myself. It was very moving. We appreciate your time and efforts and everything you do. I work closely with CASA volunteers myself. And I work with SINA cases with CASA volunteers, and they are definitely the voice of the child. And we thank you all and your volunteers for all that they do. So at this time, anyone have any questions? So we have something in the chat here. Let me just,
yeah, Dawn,
okay. Some people are saying they're interested in attending more information meetings before they volunteer. Please let me know who to reach out to directly. And that's a good question. So definitely I'll let Jennifer and Susan answer that.
So I am putting an email address in the chat. That is our advocate coordinator. She's who brings in all the volunteers and sets them up to get started in training. We will have an information session coming up, I think very early January, because we're going to start a class about mid-January. So I don't think we're doing the information session before the holidays. I believe it's going to be right after. But we can certainly add you to a list for that. So I'm more than happy if you reach out to her, she'll add you to that. She's also just a great resource. You know, part of her job is just to talk to people and answer all the questions and you know, kind of help get them to understand a little bit more about it. The other thing is, someone mentioned in the presentation, we do an interview process as well. And so we use that as an opportunity to ask you questions, but we want you to ask us questions too. So we try to prepare you for what you're getting into as much as possible.
And we will also be having a part 2 session coming up. We don't know the date of that yet, but as soon as we know the date for part 2, we'll definitely get that out to you very soon, so you could put it on your calendar. And I'm sure you'll have more information that you need. You can also, can they observe CASA volunteers in any capacity?
Not until they're in training. Part of the training is that you sit in on a court, more like a docket for when we have some CASAs in the hearings, so that you can kind of see CASAs in action, but that's part of the training part.
Thank you.
So we don't have a way to
before we keep going, I want to take Miss Teresa Young did put in her question in the chat.
Good.
The Maryland Children's Home, are they still adoptable or waiting for a family match?
So the Children's Home, most of our kids everywhere are a combination. So most group homes have some kids who are there because they are, you know, being kept in a safe place while the family addresses whatever brought them into foster care, and then they're going to go home, hopefully. Some of them have been freed for adoption, and some of them are sort of in that unknown space where we don't know yet what their longer term plan is going to be. So most group homes have lots of different situations. There are certain organizations that will help people adopt, and I can certainly provide some, you know, if people need websites or, you know, places to go to, I can provide some of that. But they're not necessarily like this whole home is for kids who need to be adopted. They're usually kind of mixed.
Thank you. We have another question from Renee Magers. She said, is this something we can volunteer for while still working a full-time job? That's an excellent question, especially since a lot of us are working full-time or we have school or other responsibilities. So that's a question.
It's a fabulous question. Yes, the answer is yes. You can do it full-time while you're working full-time. This has definitely been a trend over the last, I'd say 15, 20 years that has gone more that way. We used to have, you know, all retired people, and now we've got a lot of people that are working full-time. It's just a matter of, I'd say 2 things, you being able to manage your time, and also it does require just a bit of flexibility with your job. So I will say that teachers are sometimes challenged in doing this, although we do have some active teachers as volunteers, but their schedules are usually less flexible, that, you know, 8 to 4 thing. But the only reason I say flexibility is primarily for appearing in court. Court is actually only twice a year, so it's often not that huge of a deal, but you do have to be able to have a little bit of flexibility to be able to attend certain things throughout the year. But it's not a regular thing where you'd have to take off work, you know, once a week or even once a month. It's just every once in a while. So I would say don't let that be why you don't explore CASA, but you're welcome to sort of talk through it with us and we can help you figure that out.
Another question, I saw GAL volunteers mentioned on the slides. What is the difference between GAL and CASA?
Yep, so I'm assuming that everybody knows this, but I'll just do it anyway. So CASA, or GAL stands, or CASA, sorry, GAL stands for Guardian Ad Litem. And so some CASA programs are also Guardian Ad Litems. My program in Texas, in Austin, was a Guardian Ad Litem program. So we were actually parties to the case. In Maryland, the programs are not. We are friends of the court as opposed to a party to the case. My experience is that there's very little difference in the practical sort of day-to-day of what that means. There are some things, as a Guardian Ad Litem, we had the we were required to sign off on court orders and things like that. You know, we had a little bit more involvement in some of that sort of stuff, and we could call hearings on our own because we were a party to the case. Right now, we are able to review the orders. We can always ask questions about them if we need to. And if we ever needed to call a hearing, we have the ability to semi-informally let the court know directly that we think that a hearing is necessary, and the court could call a hearing on our behalf. The other thing is our partnerships are really strong with DSS and the children's attorneys, and the parents' attorneys too. And so if we ever had an issue that one of them agreed with us that it needed a hearing, we could go to them and have them call the hearing. So some of it is just about utilizing those partnerships for the best interest of the kid. So it's our current situation is slightly less formal, but in the day-to-day, there's not much difference.
Thank you, Jennifer. I have a question about the big sister or big brother and CASA. Do the CASA volunteers, do they hang out with the minor child, like and do fun things with them, or is it just a matter of showing up and every now and then and being?
No, and I'm sorry that we didn't make that clearer, and that's a good note for me to make. So you absolutely get to hang out with the kids. We really want you to spend that time with them, and we want it to be unstructured, informal, fun time, because that's how you build that trust. It's how you build the relationship with the youth so that they're going to talk to you about what their true needs and wants really are. You know, and building that over time, they don't want to just sit and talk about serious stuff, right? And so you are often, the volunteers are often a nice sort of relief for them, right? So they get a little bit of time just to kind of be a kid and go to McDonald's or go to the park, or sometimes kids get taken places that they've never been, you know, another part of the city or a baseball game or whatever it might be. And it might be the first time they've ever experienced anything like that. So we definitely hear also that one of the benefits of having a CASA is that they get exposure to new and different things in the world, which is, again, not why we're here, but it's one of the coolest things that we can do for kids, right? Because expanding those experiences is just wonderful. So yes, we want you to do whatever you want for the most part. As you get to know your kid, we put some boundaries on that for you so that you sort of are within the realm of what we're supposed to be doing. But yeah, we want you to get to know them.
And I just want to add on to what Jennifer said, which is you can't, to my mind, you can't really give give a recommendation that's in the best interest of a child unless you really know the child. So that entails interacting with them in a very, I don't want to say in a very personal way. That said, what the CASA training does, which I think really is great, is it sets boundaries for you so that you know where you can get into trouble, because, trauma kids, right? Traumatized kids can result in, they can ask for stuff that maybe is not best for them to have. They can interact in ways that's not necessarily the healthiest. And so you just want to be able to have that training. And also CASA volunteers have these awesome, Dan made mention of them, these awesome people called CASA advocate supervisors, and they get their own supervisor, right? That they can call and say, hey, what do I do in this situation? What do I do in that situation? So I would say, I love CASA in part for that reason. They keep a very, very open, constant communication with the volunteers. And I've had volunteers say to me, what I learned at CASA has really helped me in my life in general and in my career. So, I had a big brother, big sister, and I got to say, if I had to choose and how to help a foster kid, right, I would definitely be choosing CASA. Personally, don't speak for the organization, not trying to say don't volunteer for big brothers, big sisters. It's just a different experience.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody else have a question for CASA this evening? Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time. We are very grateful for being able to hear about everything you do. Again, if you want to be involved, the email to get involved or find out more information is in the chat box. And just to make sure, it's J Bormel, B-O-R, M as in Matthew, E-L, at casabaltco.org. So you guys go ahead and write that down if you want. If you forget or anything like that, you can reach out to any of us who have attended as part of the Bar Association. We can certainly connect you. But again, thank you for taking the time this evening. If you know any of your attorney friends who would be glad to have a lunch and learn, or any attorneys who may have not been here this evening that you know would be a good fit for CASA, or know people who would be in your personal life a good fit for CASA, please spread out the word. As you saw, there's very few CASA compared to the amount of Baltimore County cases, and so please think about the possibility of getting involved in some way, or finding some friends and family who might be involved. Thank you again, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you. Great to meet you guys.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.